the formalities. Okay, let's get through the formalities and get things going. Hopefully Rodney will join us momentarily. So if everybody's good, I'd like to call to order, where's the number on here? Mayor's Task Force number 3. And in honor of the Leetwatul, the village of Pemberton acknowledges that we are meeting within the unceded territory of the Leetwat Nation. Can I please get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Seconded by Stuart. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes from Task Force meeting number 2 from Monday, July 6th. Moved by
Ryan.
Seconded by Jackie. Oh, Jackie is there. Hi, I thought you were going on a holiday.
No, Judith is.
Oh, Judith. So any business arising from the previous meeting? Has anybody got anything from last week? I'm on one screen, so I'm flipping back and forth. If I don't see you, just call out your name and I'll get to you. Number 5, community feedback and input roundtable. Jill, you want to take that?
Sure. So I thought we would make sure that we sort of have this standing item on the agenda in the event that any of the Mayor's Task Force members become aware of a situation that they feel would be appropriate to raise at this table. I know that Judith had a couple of concerns with respect to what were they? So one of them, she had a question with respect to the pledge sign. That wasn't really an initiative of the Mayor's Task Force, but she had some concern around that. And then as well as she also had raised the fact that there have been some seniors that have been having issues with filling out the thought exchange. So I thought maybe that through this and maybe on her behalf, I would just raise that and we could have a discussion on how we might address that. But yeah, we hadn't really sort of formalized a way of people bringing issues to the table for people to discuss. So that's why we've included this line item in the agenda. So I thought maybe we could do a quick roundtable and you can just say no issues, or if you do, you could raise them now. And then what we would do is I would create sort of a list for that, and perhaps maybe we could allocate it to the working groups if appropriate, if something is raised and can be raised. Problem solved by this group. So that's what I thought we would do now. Shall we go around the table and just see if there are issues?
Sure, sounds good. I'll start with the direction of my screen. I got Stuart at the top left.
I didn't have any issues with it. I thought it was a great format. So I was happy to share that on Facebook, and I encouraged a few people to reach out on it.
And no other general issues, Stuart, that you've heard from the community just around recovery, relief, needing support?
Not at this point. I think it seems like there's been a lot of positive feedback that things are starting to happen again. Businesses are starting to roll. So it's really great to see that and to hear that. Obviously, people are impacted more than where they'd be at this time for numbers, but a lot of people, even with lower revenues, have been able to have a pretty decent net line items in their businesses so far.
Thanks, Stuart. Jackie, I got you up next. You're on mute.
Sorry. No, no issues at all. I thought it looked good. We'd like to see some more people fill it out. So just how long are we keeping it open for? What was thinking on that?
We were going to keep it open and ongoing.
Okay.
To watch how things change over the weeks and months. But I think the number we were shooting for was a minimum of 50 responses before we started sorting through. Is that what we were looking at, Jill?
Mm-hmm. And we've exceeded that. We exceeded that in the first day.
How many have we got?
To date, we have got, sorry, just bear with me. I think it was like 129 unique thoughts, and then 3,786 ratings.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Nothing else, Jackie?
Nope, it looks good.
Okay. Meredith.
Yeah, from our end, like I think everything looked good on the thought exchange. I think the only comment would be like we shared it on social media through the chamber. I sent it to our board members, asked them to fill it out. We got it out in our newsletter on Friday afternoon. So definitely I could see there being more feedback trickling in from people. So I think it's great. We're seeing a good response, but there's definitely lots of people I'm sure that are just still finding out about it as well. And then I guess like the other flag on our end is the chamber manages the visitor info center. And I just wanted to, I think we all know this, but definitely visits are way down, like over 50% down. So, I think it's understandable with Joffrey not being open and missing the international tourists, but definitely for businesses that are depending on tourists coming and tourism, they're not going to be seeing as big a bump as they normally would. So I think I just wanted to flag that and make sure everybody is aware of that. I think we see lots of good parts of our, community bouncing back over the summer, but definitely the visits are way down that we're seeing it through the visitor center.
One of my staff works also with you guys at the visitor center, so I'm always asking her. And I think part of it is also, or a big part of it is that the visitors we're getting are lower mainland and therefore maybe less inclined to stop at the visitor center because they're already from the area as opposed to coming from Washington or California or something like that. I think that might be part of it because there's certainly a lot of people on the roads, but again, it's a different type of travel. What are you hearing from business owners? Are you hearing any particular challenges on the ground, Meredith?
I think nothing like, I think everybody's seeing like a hub of activity back, but I think it's just, that similar feedback you had about, just trying to manage the people and that being like another component of it. Mark can probably speak to it, but I know Tourism Pemberton is working on a campaign. They just came to us on Friday saying that like a lot of operators are finding that weekend visits are up and business is great on the weekends, but definitely midweek is hard. And I think you're seeing that lack of, people coming through. And I know things like, say the example of like Copper Cayuse Outfitters, a lot of their clientele is international people that are coming. So, they're missing those people and having to fill those gaps. So it does make sense that like the weekend traffic's way up, midweek is harder to fill.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting long weekend. I think we're going to see a lot of traffic on the road this weekend. Thanks, Meredith. Natalie?
No concerns from me. We've also shared it through our streams as well. But the one thing that I think we've already brought up is the survey doesn't reach those who don't have access to technology or lack the literacy skills. So I'm not sure if that's something that we can chat about of how we might be able to facilitate getting feedback from those individuals so to make sure that everybody is represented.
Definitely. I want to talk about that for sure.
Erin?
Yeah, all good on my end. I circulated through my network and just hoping that we can get lots of numbers so we get a true representation of what everyone's experiencing.
Ryan?
Thanks, Mike. I've had a lot of good feedback about the thought exchange. I think a lot of people are appreciative that we're putting it out there to see what the concerns of the community are. When I've spoken to some people within the village, they, like I said, they bring up the daycare issue again and again. But one person came up to me and said something specific, and they said, it's great that we talk about daycare, but I think the message is when somebody says daycare, they think of like 18 months to 5 years old. And I think what some of the concerns coming out of the community are is for those parents that have kids that are in just getting into elementary school and can't be left at home alone yet. And if and when, I hope it doesn't happen, we get locked down again, it's those single parents that won't be able to go to work because they have to stay at home with their kids and they don't have a partner to cover childcare. So more over the range of 5 and over is what people have been talking, or one person brought to my attention. So that was the big concern that came out of the people I've been talking to. But overall, everybody really enjoys the thought exchange and is happy that we're reaching out to them.
Thanks. Jay.
Thanks, Mike. No issues on our end. So thanks to Jill. We'll do another round of pushing. I think what we'll do is maybe get a regular setup, Jill, to get it out on social media maybe on a weekly basis or whatever you suggest. I share some of the concerns of Natalie in terms of folks not having access to good quality internet or the technology to be able to complete the survey. Mm-hmm. And then Ryan, absolutely. I think families, we're hearing that school will be back 100%. There was some communication over the weekend that the school board would be moving forward with 100%. That being said, if and when the second wave hits, a lot of families are trying to prepare for that plan B. And I'm hearing some really interesting things that can, I think, be sort of seeded through our committees that particularly with single moms, they're buddying up so that maybe one can work through the morning and then they switch the children off and the other one works the afternoon. And there's sort of mom sharing groups, that type of thing that are happening informally. So, perhaps through this work, we can seed some of those ideas and connect moms in creative ways. So thanks for bringing that.
That's a great idea. I like that mom sharing group. My Trisha did that when the boys were very, very young with two other moms, and they would swap childcare days. So that's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jay. Mark. Mark, you with us? Okay, Rodney.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Oh. Go ahead, Rodney. I'll come in after.
Okay, sorry, I was a few minutes late. I had a tech meltdown over here. The survey looked great. The results, I spent quite a bit of time over the weekend going through them. It was really impressive to see. I haven't seen Thought Exchange like that in depth, and I think it's been really helpful to have it organized a little bit and see how well the upvotes work. But yeah, I think what people are saying about inclusivity and making sure that we just continue to get it out over time is really important. But there's some really good stuff coming back, right? It's much broader than I would have imagined, and yeah, there's some really good feedback.
Awesome, thanks, Rodney. Mark, are you with us?
I'm with you, Mike. Sorry. So as Meredith had mentioned, Tourism Pembroke is undertaking a marketing program that's geared to midweek. Hopefully we'll be launching that just shortly after the long weekend, but we're playing it by ear based on what's going on in the communities as far as, where we're at in terms of Dr. Henry, really. We've released the survey on the Tourism Pembroke website. I do see some.
Sorry, Mark, you're breaking up.
Okay. Nikki, did you have anything you want to throw in?
No, I don't. Thanks.
Okay. Well, if everybody's good, Mark, if you clear up your internet, let us know if you want to finish your thoughts there. Otherwise, we'll get into the review of the Thought Exchange report.
And sorry, can I just add, Mike, like if anyone does think of something during the meeting or you want to add something, feel free to add it to the chat in Zoom and I can pull it from there too.
Okay. So Jill, do you want to take us through the Thought Exchange result?
Sure. I'm just gonna share my screen.
Too many things going on my screen.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Can everybody see the thought exchange? Yeah, okay, great. So I took a review of most of the inputs that we got through Thought Exchange, and I basically developed the themes that you see before you. Sorry, my IT reminder is kind of stuck over the vision and community planning. So I basically took all of those inputs and came up with these proposed themes. So I thought that perhaps we could have a quick discussion on maybe some of the things that you thought were kind of interesting or different, maybe something that you didn't expect that we received input on. And then what we would do is then have a discussion around these themes, and if we think they're appropriate, if we want to edit them, change them, maybe add to them, keeping in mind that we probably will attack maybe 2 or 3 themes to start off with. So yeah, I thought that would probably be a good place to start. So was there anything, does anyone have anything that they wanted to remark about any of the input we got, or something you found interesting or something you wanted to flag?
So again, with Jill's screen sharing up here, I can't see everybody. So if you want to speak, just say your name and we'll go to you, because I can't see everybody's hands. And sorry, Jill, what is the last bar that I can't see?
The last bar is called Vision and Community Planning.
Okay. Okay. So does anybody want to jump in?
Mike, Ryan?
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was surprised at how much feedback there was on the food resiliency and creating, I'd almost say creating our own food network for the Pemberton area. That one surprised me for sure. That's just my 2 cents. The rest seemed quite kind of what I've heard around the community and kind of what I thought I'd see. But the food resiliency one was a surprise. I like to see that. I think it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
I was surprised how kind of even it was in terms of people's concerns. I thought the concerns were very broad. I thought we were going to end up a little bit more with a couple real leaders, so to speak. That was what sort of surprised me.
Mm-hmm. I was surprised quite a bit about masks. That was a really big and prominent theme I found throughout the feedback. Like I would say the majority of the public safety items were around masks. I was almost tempted just to group that as like its own separate category, just to be able to quantify, how many people had sort of pointed that out. So I found that quite interesting too.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have some thoughts on the themes?
I thought that, I was going to say, I thought the same thing. They were quite well balanced. Like I was going into it at different times, and you'd see different things rising to the top, and then something new would sort of come up. But it's interesting to see this bar graph, how balanced everything is. I think sometimes it's important to remember things too, like vision and those kind of things may not always be top of mind, where then you see something like masks, that's like something that's like concrete and everybody, I feel like it's sort of a top of mind thing. So I think it's important to kind of look at these with balance too as we go through them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good point, Meredith. I think some of them are very sort of broader or high level, whereas some of them are specific, like the masks theme there. And as a result, I think there's definitely, as expected, some overlap from one to the other. Vision definitely ties into tourism, to environmental well-being. There's definitely some connectivity between some of these bars as well. And I think some of them as well are, as we go through this now, we'll look at it. Some of them are being worked on, so to speak, within the community already. So it'll be interesting.
So are we feeling like the names or the themes are adequate? Like they're not too broad? Are we feeling like we can convert these into solutions perhaps?
I think so. Jackie, Rodney, do you want to throw in terms of
can jump in. I can't see Rodney, but I think that I like the fact that they're nice and broad. And I went through them as well and felt that, in fact, a couple of them we could put together. Like, we don't have that big of a committee. So I was looking at them and thinking that some could be clustered. And then as we unpack the clusters, I think what we're going to be able to do is pick out the themes that are within that theme. That makes sense, like sub items within that, within the overall theme. And then as we do that, the committee that's working on them will have a better idea, because some of these things are chicken or an egg, you know, like they're so interconnected. In fact, everything is interconnected. But as we start to break it down further, we should be able to do some root cause analysis work, and we can figure out if there's bottlenecks. So if we looked after one thing, does that then release 5 more things? So I think that we can do that from what we have here. Those are my thoughts on the clusters and topics.
That's good. That's
sorry.
Because I was a little concerned. Like, those are all very important themes, the way they're identified, and I like the way you said that, because I was worried that we would end up sort of cutting out some important aspects here for capacity reasons. Sorry, Jill, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, Jackie and I were sort of talking offline before the meeting, and she was suggesting, as an example, like what she was saying, sort of clustering them, that perhaps tourism could be under economic well-being.
I agree.
I totally agree.
Okay. Is there any other clusters that we see that maybe we could group together?
Go ahead.
Sorry. My other thought was communication, outreach, and education. I think that that's going to be a category of everything. So every single area needs to have communication, outreach, and education attached to it. So opposed to just sort of doing one by itself, because those people, whoever's working in that category, are going to have to go in and out of all the other categories to find out what's going on. So instead of having that as a category, it's definitely important, but it runs as a red thread through all the other categories that I would suggest include stakeholder engagement, communication, cascading of information. Absolutely, education is going to be part of that. And then I think we're going to want to build in feedback loops so that as soon as we make changes or we do anything, we get instant feedback on how it's working or not working, so that we can adjust and have continuous improvement as we start to move forward. So that was my thought on that one. But the others, I think, are all great topics, and I agree with you. I think that they are, each one of them, I think, is pretty powerful.
Do you think, would you say the same thing about the vision bar, that it goes with every one of the other categories as well, or is that something we want to look at on it? I know we talked about the identity and the vision for Pemberton being something that we work on while we do all this other.
Well, my thoughts, yeah, and I'm interested to hear what Rodney thinks about this, because I see that as something in the work that he does. But my thoughts on it are that we should keep that as a category, even though it might feel like to the rest of us that it's high level, it's not tactical, it's not needed. It actually, I would say the opposite. I would say that that's really important to move that forward, because if we have a group working on that, they also will give it'll go the other way. So that one is at the top, it'll give feedback to all the other verticals, which will then create a communication strategy, which then gets to boots on the ground. So I wouldn't want to take that one off. I wouldn't want to put it to the side. I think that it would be nice if we could at least do some work on that one now, because I think that it would be very helpful, even if we're getting sort of some high-end goals or some clearer objectives, if we're able to get some maybe value statements, that kind of thing, I think will help other people make decisions. That's my thought. I don't know. I'd like to hear what Rodney thinks from that on that one.
Rodney, you want to get in?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a little bit and going in my mind back to the original process that we wanted to consider using, that we talked about in the last meeting, and thinking about why we need these themes and what's the purpose of having these themes. And And I think the distinction you made, Mike, between short-term and long-term activities, or whatever we're going to pose, is really important. Because I'll use an example to try and better articulate what's in my mind right now. Take masks on one end of the spectrum, right? No one in town, or very few people in town, are wearing masks, and it's obviously a concern that a number of people have raised, and it seems like a pretty valid one to me. On the other end of the spectrum, we don't feel like we have a vision for the community that could filter through all these types of things that we're talking about, but potentially could be helpful for the next, few decades. I think we could put our heads together and solve the masks problem relatively quickly. I think creating a vision could take 6 or 12 months to do properly. And so I'm wondering, what I'm trying to figure out is how are the themes helpful to get us to the list of bodies of work that need to be done by either us or, splinter groups of us. And I guess coming full circle, my question is, do we anticipate multiple bodies of work within each theme? And is that helpful, or is what we need to be doing actually just starting to identify the bodies of work that need doing between short term and ones that are going to take a little longer, I guess, is the question. So if we agree to the themes, what's the next step, I guess, is the question.
Jill, you want to go?
Yeah, I think in my mind, the themes were more around being able to identify those working groups. Because I agree, like, economic well-being is huge. And the bodies of work under that are like, even with tourism, Mark, I'd love for you to provide your input on tourism being under the economic well-being, but tourism itself is a huge undertaking. So yeah, in my mind, the themes were more around just helping us establish those working groups and establish where we're going to allocate ourselves. So I don't feel like the themes have to be there. I think for sort of understanding like the balance, I think was really useful, but the bodies of work are really sort of what's most important. And I do agree, like, I think it's really important for us as a working group, as well as the community, to have those quick wins, and as well as have those long-term goals and solutions that we work on over time. So I'm definitely not married to themes, and I don't know if that is sort of what you're suggesting, Rodney, but rather like take away the themes and create the bodies of work without them. I'm good with that too, if the group wants to do that. But I think definitely if we do go with themes, having some short-term wins and long-term gains are going to be really important for our own momentum and for the community.
Yeah, I think the themes are important from a mental construct perspective to help us know what we're all talking about or what we're specifically playing in. Mm-hmm. I guess it probably comes down, what's relevant here is maybe coming down towards process and how we work together as a group. Within each theme, there's going to be multiple potential bodies of work. Some will be short term, some will be long term. Mm-hmm. And I guess what's relevant is, do we want to splinter off groups to focus on the whole theme and think about, some of them are pretty big, right? Economic well-being, if it has tourism under it, is a monster, right? Do you want to send off a subgroup of this group with some people from outside of the task force and then have them go work on that? Or are we better to give them better definition around what bodies of work we want them to focus on, if that makes sense? And as coming back to the masks example, it seems like we may want to put a layer of priority on things before we splinter off into big groups, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Then can we do it that way, though? I mean, I feel, again, chicken and an egg situation. Like, part of me feels like we need to dig into the themes a little bit to discover what are the low-hanging fruit or the short-term wins, and then what we can tackle later. And that's, I think that's just going to come out through conversation. So I guess maybe I'm asking the same question as Rodney here. Jill, was your thought that we take the themes and split our groups according to the theme, or were we going to go to a next step and start breaking it down?
So what my initial thoughts were is we would identify, as a group, we would agree on what the top sort of 3 themes would be that we would tackle. And then we would identify an ambassador or a leader for that theme, and then we would identify a support group for that theme. So what I'm thinking is perhaps, you know, if we were to go stick with this theme route, basically the you know, say it was, you know, Mike, Stuart, Jackie wanted to do economic well-being. The 3 of you would basically go through all the responses within the economic well-being responses, and I think that you could probably cluster them between short-term and long-term gains, and then perhaps things that are not, that it's not something that we have any control over. And then that way, you know, it would be a discussion between that group as to what should be prioritized within that theme, and what can be worked over the long term, and what we just can't address for whatever reason, whether we don't have control over it or capacity.
So go ahead, Meredith.
I was just going to say, how do we avoid also having silos and duplications of efforts? Like, I'm just thinking economic well-being, development, and tourism. Like, I know we have 2 different economic development plans going on, one for the village, one for the region. There's a group working on those. I know there's been tourism, you know, some strategies. There's a sea to sky strategy too. Like, how do we make sure that these groups, like when we break them out, aren't becoming another layer on top of all these other layers, or are trying to, you know, don't realize that there's other things that are happening, that there's already a path that have started down, or some good ideas that have already been put out there. How do we make sure we figure out that?
That's a great question, because I think there is, along the lines that we're talking, and sort of jump in there, Jill, but I think there's work going on currently in the community. And I think, you know, when you say economic and tourism is a monster, it is, but we already have the chamber, we have the tourism pyramid, we have an economic development committee. So there's a lot of work being done there. I think part of the main goal of some of these subgroups, or these splinter groups, will be to gather the information as to what is going on in the community, and either help support that or build off of it. And we're going to have to ask the questions you just asked, like you guys, everybody's got to be very open to whether it's reaching out to us or to each other to say, hey, well, what's going on that we don't know about? You know, again, Meredith and Mark, just between the 2 of you, you know a lot about what's going on in the business community and tourism. So again, I think there's work being done out there, and we want to build on it, or, you know, and that's a bit of a segue here. You know, when I look at those themes, and Jill's encouraging us to choose 3 themes, I don't see how we can cut any of those themes out. Like, I agree with marrying a couple. I agree with the communication statement that Jackie made, that kind of goes with all the themes, but that still leaves us, what, 5, I think? 6? And if that's the case, I'd be hard pressed to remove any of them. So I wonder if, as we're discussing this and we're assigning ourselves to these splinter groups, is part of that conversation also sounds like, okay, in terms of that big one, economic and tourism together, let's form a committee, recognizing that we're going to be drawing on a whole bunch of other people, or a number of other people that are doing work within the community. You know what I mean? Whereas a mask, if there's a whole theme about masks, as an example, then it's a matter of finding out what VCH's recommendations are and what other communities are doing, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot quicker. But I think we should just, I'm sort of rambling here, but I guess my point is we should recognize as we're talking that some of these groups are going to require more help from the outside, and more people to be able to tackle it. You know, and I don't know. Very clear.
And then on top of that as well, there's the essential stuff that needs to be included. Like, you know, the OCP is a good example, right, in regards to planning. But then there's also things that may not ordinarily come to mind, like, you know, Meredith, the campaign you're doing with Love Pemberton. Is there a way, you know, we wouldn't necessarily first think about this, but if you apply a layer of creativity, why can't that be the solution to masks, right? Why aren't we selling Love Pemberton masks as everywhere as the solution, right? So there's the essential involved stakeholders and groups, and then there's the ones that just you may connect other dots, right? And
I love that idea of like, how can you amplify things and get, you know, more of us bringing them up? Because I think you're right. There's more things we can do in areas to make them bigger and better.
Yeah. And that's where a diverse group like this will be really helpful. You know, that's just one idea I had. I'm sure everyone else can have similar ideas in terms of how can we kill two birds with one stone all over the place and strengthen multiple things. And I think there's probably work to do in this group, determining the bodies of work, thinking a little bit about the problem, thinking a little bit about priorities before we, and even stakeholders for each thing before we assign action committees. I think it may take a really long time and risk not getting the traction we want if we give themes to action committees versus bodies of work or specific things to action committees. Is, as we all talk this out, that's where I think it could be time best spent.
Rodney, do you have a suggestion then on how we could form the working groups then without them being themed? How do we, like, are you thinking that maybe we do the issues identification first and then people can self-assign to those issues they want to tackle? You think?
Yeah, that's what I'm leaning towards. I think the main choice we've got to make in terms of process and how to push this forward is, do we want to find action committees or, you know, splinter committees and give them a theme and let them go away and understand the problem and prioritize what they want to work on? Or do we want to hold that closer in this group and spend more time with the inputs we've got before we assign teams? And I think I'm leaning really strongly to the latter as we talk it all out. Because I think we'll get better traction, and I think we'll get more helpful groups to work on things if we spend more time really understanding, like, what are the bodies of work that could be possible within each theme, like the long list, prioritize those in that there may be two within one theme, one within another, and we just say, you know what, the first month we just want to solve these three things. Assign committees to those priorities and then guide those committees on what we want them to do. Like Mike said, go gather information, including mapping out stakeholders, essential and, you know, creative stakeholders and existing activities, understand the roadblocks to solving the body of work, develop solutions, and then come up with an action plan. That would probably be the most efficient and, like, easiest path forward. I think if you give themes to groups who don't have experience with this kind of thing, like, they may come back with not enough momentum or action. It may take them 6 months to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It seems very, like, the themes themselves seem very tactical in response. And I think I agree a lot with what Rodney's saying, that you need to have more of a strategic role with them where there's maybe a vision that's a little bit more clear on exactly what we're looking to accomplish in a broader context for the long term, and seeing how that impacts where we take the groups. I don't know how to do that, but.
Yeah, so I guess my question to the group is how do we efficiently get into digging into these themes and identifying these priorities that we want to start working on? And then, because I think, like, our goal for this meeting was to establish those sort of working groups, if you will. And then those working groups would set their first meeting to work on things. So does anyone have any suggestions? And again, I think that maybe, you know, we can backtrack and talk about sort of those main sort of points that people had raised that stuck out to each of you. Maybe that's a way that we can sort of start the discussion on some short-term and long-term things that we want to work on. Does anyone have suggestions on?
Yeah, I've got Jackie and Natalie lined up.
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to take a step back and say that if we were to put groups together, they're not necessarily action groups, because we can't go to action yet because we still haven't stepped back to define what the problem is. So the themes were a way to perhaps find out what people were interested in working on, and then it would be, so if we think about this whole group, there's quite a few of us in this group. So I would argue that this group is too big to get to innovation quickly. And that would be why I would suggest that maybe we go into subgroups. But I mean, I can watch a new process, but the process that I had suggested was that we went into subgroups, and then each subgroup starts at the beginning of the process, which is in fact finding. So in the fact finding stage, they would find out who else is working on it, what is the need. They would analyze the data that they have and actually look outside their circle by bringing in some more stakeholders to help them work on it. And then from that, we'd actually follow a process. So the next step that we would then go into is defining the problem. Once they define the problem, which this is where we could transfer skills to help them understand the problem and define it further. Then you go into solution finding. So at each one of the steps, we could report back to this group, so people wouldn't just be off on their own in the wilderness trying to figure it out. They would actually use that process in defining to come up with where the quick wins are and what needs to, because in that process, you actually look for high, medium, low priority, and short, medium, long-term goals. So you look at where's the low-hanging fruit that we can deal with really quickly, and then we can solution find around that. And from that point, that's when they would come back with some recommendations of solutions after, because any solution we come up with needs to be evaluated back again to the original problem. Now we can do that together as this great big group if we wanted to just sort of look at this whole messy problem and say, let's look at the whole thing and figure out where we want to put this group's energy. Maybe we just want to put it in one of those verticals, or maybe we want to pick two. But my suggestion would have been to make small groups sooner than later, and to have each group then use the process in order to figure out the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, so that we could deal with things quickly. Because I do think some of the things that you're saying, like masks as an example, is there anybody else working on it? I'm sure there is. What other resources do we need to include, or what other bodies do we need to include in those conversations who could be helpful and who could help us get the word out? So that would be that whole part about making sure we have the right stakeholders at the table. Or we just stay together and try to work on some things ourselves. But I think that would be the least effective or efficient in this moment. But that's just my thought.
Natalie, I'm going to get right to you in a sec. I just have a follow-up question, because to me, in my mind, the way I saw it going was sort of in between, a hybrid of the way you're both talking, in the sense that we get into our splinter groups. Those groups identify stakeholders. You know, we'll give them a list. We'll give every group a list so that, like Jackie says, they're not in the wilderness. Here's a list of things to identify: stakeholders, challenges, other activities being done on the topic, et cetera, et cetera. Bring that together, have a conversation with the subgroup. But to me, this was coming back pretty regularly to this group. So if Aaron and I are working on whatever topic and with our other groups, and we come back with some suggestions, you know, one of you might pipe in and go, oh, well, you should contact, here's another stakeholder you didn't think of. Or, so we, you know, the subgroups would do some of that base work, flush out some of the information that needs to be gathered, flush out who's working on what, like within the community already, some of the challenges, and bring it back to this group for a little bit more creative, you know, is that me? A little more creative, sorry, that distracted me, back and forth to make sure we're not missing anything. As Rodney said, I agree, you know, that some of us don't have experience in doing some of this work, so we don't want to be working for 6 months, you know, or something. We want to keep moving ahead. So if that means the subcommittee does some work, comes back to this bigger group, we help explore it a little bit further and move back. Does that make sense? To me, it's kind of a hybrid between the way both of you are discussing things. Jill, you want to follow that up before I go to Natalie?
For sure. And it kind of speaks to what you're speaking to, and as well as Meredith's concern as well, is Nikki and I were sort of talking about if we were to identify 3 themes, perhaps, you know, in each group, maybe Mike, myself, and Nikki could be assigned to those. And I mean, I think between the 3 of us, we have a fairly good understanding, high level of what is going on in the community to ensure that there isn't any duplication, or we have the contacts of people to reach out to. So know that you have that resource as well as Jackie's expertise around, you know, the identifying the problem and then the subsequent planning.
Yeah. So I don't know where. Sorry, let's go to Natalie. You've been waiting patiently.
Thanks. I was just going to say it would be good, you know, if we do have the themes established, just to even go over some of the common feedback that we've received from the community as a group, just to everybody has some awareness, because there could be some crossover between different things. And again, if we're kind of working in different subgroups, we might not necessarily know what's going on before we start adding input or ideas. Might just be good to kind of just look at everything all together, just so that we can see, oh, there might be a connection to this group or into this theme that might work with the other. So I would be more curious to kind of look at the bigger picture and then going into the subgroups.
And do you see that happening through the course of today, or are you talking about over?
Yeah, I mean, if it's at all possible to go through some of the stuff, some of the feedback that was kind of categorized, it would be good to just have that bigger picture before we dive right into the smaller, unique groups.
Sure. Anybody else? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. The one comment I just had, it sort of is around the vision. I would say that's the one thing I don't think really anyone in town has had the time or the resources to be able to work on, and that you know, it wouldn't be a duplication of efforts. It would be really valuable to have you know, a group focusing in on that and looking at that and bringing in all these different parts, because to me that's the big umbrella that goes over top of everything. And you know, and it is that thing. I think there's a lot of talk and a lot of people saying we want to have this, we're missing this, we'd like to have it, but nobody has had the ability or just the bandwidth to be able to get it going. And that to me would be a really valuable contribution for this group.
Mm-hmm. Erin?
Yeah, so I've been kind of just thinking about like what we're lacking, what I'm feeling we're lacking is kind of that sense of vision. And to go back onto this love Pemberton piece, I think that's something that would be really valuable. Coming from a feelings perspective, it's what I do. It's always like, we want to create a feeling. And it was kind of like a recent experience going to Tofino, and I'm feeling like, am I actually welcomed here? Am I actually should I be here? Am I safe to be here? What do the locals think? And it's the same when I'm here. You know, am I safe? Am I feeling okay that we have people traveling to Pemberton? So I think it's this piece on what feeling are we wanting to create for our locals, for people traveling through. We want, you know, especially during a time of sort of crisis, people need to feel safe. They need to feel loved. It's how the brain works. It's how we all function when processing information. First is, am I safe? Then it's, am I loved? So I think to kind of keep that as maybe the North Star of what feelings do we want to create for locals, for people traveling through, and then work back. I don't know. This was just kind of something that I was thinking, hearing you all speak. So just to kind of, yeah, I don't know.
So how do we want to do this, everybody? We can go back to looking at the themes. We could start going through, like, what was your thought, Jill, that we would go right into breaking down groups, or did we want to go through some of the feedback a little bit more?
Well, in my mind, the themes help us establish those groups. And then, and like I said, I was thinking that the groups would then identify sort of the short-term priorities and the long-term priorities within those themes.
Natalie's suggestion was to just understand a little bit more of the feedback
Yeah.
so that we understand what the groups are working on. And
So Natalie, what were you thinking as far as like how do we go through all of the feedback together, and then were you thinking that we would go through all of the feedback and then sort of prioritize them, like short term, long term?
Yeah, like I'm thinking like even not going through all the feedback, but maybe just some of the bigger ones that got the higher ratings, just so that everybody has a good sense of like what's been covered. And then we'll have a much better idea of what type of groups we might feel perhaps either best utilized in, or even if there is potentially, there's a possibility that there's a couple different reoccurring themes that might connect with the other from the other group, so that way we can discuss that. So it's just more for having a broader awareness of what's going on before we start working on our individual tasks.
Can I just share my screen again for just one sec? So let's look back at thought exchange. So perhaps like we could look at, so these are the highest rated thoughts. Bring back the reuse it, food sustainability, dedicate energy and resources towards those who live here, encourage shopping at home. Yeah, that's not really, those are kind of a bit more, well, Jay, the first one's for you. Yeah, I was kind of curious just to sort of see what had risen to the top. I mean, obviously bring back the reuse it center is a very specific thing, but you know, if we sort of peel back the layers of that onion, does that mean that we need to, you know, look at some options for, you know, is it affordability? Is it the environment? You know, potentially like, you know, there's some things that we need to unwrap with that comment, but
honestly, Bill, I don't think there's, just to jump in there, I don't think there's any harm in understanding that we may need to broaden our distribution base at the food bank to include additional basic needs like clothing, like, you know, masks, medical supplies, and so on, that, you know, may or may not be, you know, financially viable for some folks in community. We're happy to explore that. Certainly in COVID times, we may not be able to, as we see with Whistler Community Services right now, achieve the full, you know, model of a reuse it center. But absolutely, we've been thinking that at a food bank to increase our basic need distribution.
How about this? Can you take us off screen share? How about we just, you know, I'm just thinking about time, and you know, we all want to be effective here, obviously. I do agree with Rodney's comments in that there's expertise and knowledge in this group that will be helpful for other groups. But I think we need to take a few steps forward at the same time. So what if we were to establish our groups according to themes, as sort of Jill had laid out, as a next step? To me, one of the first steps for those groups would be to do what Natalie just suggested, which is go through thought exchange, look through the responses that continue to come in, identify which sort of really impact the group we're working on, do other things like we've talked about, identify stakeholders and challenges, and a few other things that each group will have sort of some homework to do on, but to bring that back and have a conversation about it here in the next meeting and to see how those overlap. So it'll be interesting if Jay and Natalie are working on whatever and, you know, public safety, some sort of public safety issue, or some of the comments that have come out in Thought Exchange are in their, you know, that they've identified as being important to the work they're doing, and Aaron and Jackie are working on something else, they've identified the same thing. We will then identify the crossover. What is not unique, but what is common to tourism and economics, to you know, public safety, and what is common in that to, you know, the vision for all of it. So we'll maybe be able to identify some of the crossover, get the input from this group and say, oh, well, have you considered the following? Give the subgroups a little bit more to work with when we send them away after the next meeting. So again, identify the themes now and give ourselves some work to do so that when we come back, we can sort of we could hash it out, see what we've come up with, and then provide each other's groups with some input. Does that make sense, Rodney? It's sort of counter to the process you were thinking of.
Yeah, I think it does. I just think if we're meeting once a month, there may not be a whole ton that happens before the next meeting.
I mean, again, if we decide as a group what should happen in that subcommittee, even if it's a one meeting of that subcommittee, I feel like that subgroup should be able to identify, again, stakeholders, challenges, go through the thought exchange and sort of sort through that and see how it applies to their group and whatever else we decide to assign each other. And that's doable and before our next meeting.
Maybe you want to keep what you just suggested and insert a step that for short-term actions, they don't need to be run past the whole group, but instead just run past, you and the city, for example, so that we're not waiting. Like, if you use the mask, because I think in my mind, I've just been playing around a spreadsheet here to figure out like how we could potentially do it. And I think the way in which you articulate the bodies of work helps to bridge the short versus long-term distinction. And so if you have a short-term, I'll stick with the same example, but short-term body of work is make sure everyone's wearing masks, right? That's very tangible and tactical. If you keep the vision example, what needs to be done is to determine how to comprehensively create a vision. It's not to create the vision, right? It's kind of, you've got to figure out what's the plan to create a vision before you go and do it, because it's so comprehensive, whereas the masks is probably a bit quicker and dirtier. Mm-hmm. So I think if we keep that in mind when we determine the bodies of work for each theme, then that solves the problem. If that makes sense.
Okay, it does, and I think we're leading into the homework that each group should be doing. I think that's a really good point. Let's identify some of those actions right off, so not everything takes 1 or 2 month processes to get through. Let's identify some of those quick actions that either goes through the city or might be something that, Meredith, the chamber runs with, or who knows, right? But to back up then, is everybody comfortable at this point identifying the priority themes and sort of self-assigning at this point? Is everybody good to go ahead with that next step?
Can I suggest 4 themes?
Yeah, 4, is that what you said?
So, yeah, I think vision and communication obviously bridge everything, but it seems like from the thought exchange there, 4 might be a good starting point. So tourism and economy, transportation, food sustainability, and then health and wellness.
Tourism and economics, health and wellness, vision, is that one of them?
Transportation. I think vision and communication are going to bridge everything.
Right.
Vision, it's really at the top of everything, and then communication's at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Communications is
everything's sandwiched in between.
Yeah.
I agree, Stuart, but would you say that the vision guides each group?
But I think the vision's the most important part, but it's the part that, like Rodney was suggesting earlier, it's something that probably takes up to a year to really create something very meaningful, which is a challenge, given we're trying to act.
When we're talking about vision, though, are we talking about the vision for the Mayor's Task Force, or are we talking about a community vision?
Yeah,
I think it's more a community vision, and it probably ties into the work that's going to be happening at the village with the OCP very clearly through the fall.
In our last meeting, we talked about doing this concurrently, having some part of this group working on that vision. And I agree, Stu, we talked about, the OCP, how it ties into that work. But there seemed to be some sort of direction from this group that the vision thing would be going on while we're doing our other work. Is that the thought, or did I get that wrong?
If I can, I do have concerns with this group taking and leading on the kickoff to the vision of a village OCP. That is a concern of mine. I think the staff involved who would be leading that aren't even part of this group. And I think that what needs to happen is when we do that, we encourage all of those who are part of this and potentially would be assigned to the long-term vision of this group to be part and take an active role in what we're bringing forward as part of the OCP. The other interesting thing that this was brought up, the village's economic development plan that we're working on, that is also something that's come out of that, and that the community is looking for a vision. So we're seeing in multiple places. And I think it needs to be something that the village leads with support from some other groups. And that is a serious concern of mine if we are to branch off and take it from this group before we've had the ability to kick it off ourselves.
Nikki, that's a really good example of why I don't think we can assign themes to subgroups. I think we have to assign, well, I think we have to strongly consider assigning like bodies of work to subgroups. Because if you run that example, the body of work is, there's, you know, a large degree of people saying we need a vision. Okay, so what's going on there already? And what's the subgroup? Who should lead it, right? And so, you know, example, that should be your subgroup to get a bit more input from key people in this group, or to make sure we're connecting all the possible dots, right? That if we just give community vision to a subgroup of this committee, like that's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful if I, through Thought Exchange, basically took the top, say, 5 thoughts under each of those themes, and then that would sort of maybe help us contemplate the highest priority or the highest need, and then through those identify sort of short-term and long-term projects that we would get from that. So, because the thing is say, for instance, the group doesn't identify public safety as a priority, but masks was probably the most common thing in there. How do we make sure that masks is addressed, even though it's not one of the top themes? So I guess I'm kind of speaking to your point, Rodney, that there may be things that get missed. So I'm just wondering, would it be helpful for the group to sort of see the top 5 to 10 thoughts in each of those categories, and then we might be able to see a theme, we might be able to see some themes within there, or we might be able to group them together and then start assigning people to those tasks? Would that be helpful? Because I don't think when we're looking at these themes right now, I mean, without having that list in front of us, we don't really know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. You know, because like if we, again, you know, like Rodney pointed out, if we've got economic well-being and tourism as one group, that's a big hairy beast.
But there's already lots of groups working on it.
Pardon me?
It is a big hairy beast, but we've got the chamber, we've got Tourism Pemberton, we got the economic development plan underway. So it's not like when you just say economics and tourism, yes, it's huge, but that's not factoring in all the work that's going on there. We're trying to tie it together, right? Yes,
for sure.
To some degree, though, I mean, some of what they're saying do we want to welcome people to, like, in droves to come back? And where does that balance with the businesses? And like, we're not working on that part at this point.
No, I get that. But what I'm saying is we're saying, oh, economics and tourism is huge. We're not working on all aspects of economic development and tourism here. We're working on it with through the lens of the pandemic, and how that also, you know, again, how we can tie into some of the other work being done in the community. So, I mean, I don't think we should be scared to put them together because they're 2 really big areas. If we're going to pick 4 themes, I think what we could do here is do sort of, again, a bit of a hybrid, and along the lines of what Rodney's saying, let's pick our themes, let's break them down a little bit before we assign ourselves. Let's start by picking the themes, and we're sort of doing that right now. Break them down a little bit into what kind of actions we're talking about on each one, and then we could start self-assigning, and hopefully by the end of this meeting come up with groups. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my question, going back to your original one, Mike, about are we at a point where we can divide themes? What do we need to, what are the things we need to accomplish in the next 45 minutes? Like, what do you want to use the next 45 minutes for?
Ideally, I would like to have working groups established, and then,
yeah.
But Yeah, that's my hope. I mean, my initial one was to establish the themes and the working groups, but you know, depending on how the group wants to go, I think we do need to divide and conquer here so we can start identifying the issues, understanding the problem, and then start doing some strategic planning and outreach and things like that. I have to say, I do like Stuart's suggestions on kind of renaming them, because I do feel that the way that those groups, the themes were named, are pretty like high level and conceptual. Whereas I feel like I can wrap my head around transportation if I'm in a transportation group. So I do like Stuart's suggestion. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on the groups or the themes.
So Stuart's suggestions were tourism and economics, transportation, health and wellness, and what was the fourth one, Stuart?
Food sustainability.
Food sustainability.
That's a big, broad one. And I don't know how you do a theme on sustainability.
There is actually a task force that is working on food sustainability.
Oh, food sustainability. I thought, okay, yeah. Yeah. Anybody else suggestions on those themes? Does that capture the priorities we saw in the thought exchange?
I just want to, if I could, jump back in on Erin's comment that she made earlier, which I think is really, I just don't want it to get lost. And she was talking about the feeling of safety and then feeling loved, and then using the Chamber's Love Pemberton as a North Star. Like, I think that if we started there, that is, I'm going to say that crosses everything, because really, why would we, I mean, that speaks right to the emotional and social well-being, but it also speaks to economic health, and also to tourism, which is part of the economic health. So if you're not feeling welcome, then you're not going to want to be here. Maybe from when we start thinking about safety and health and well-being, maybe that is one that is like really important right now to be thinking about how everything cascades under that. So thinking about the themes, we might even just want to make it the two. Like, if we want to make it three, we could, but I'm thinking transportation is going to, is also going to come under economic and social. So, and sustainability, well, we want everything to be sustainable. Everything that we do right now shouldn't be a Band-Aid. Everything should carry us forward in a more positive way. Mm-hmm. So we could even just break it down to two themes, and then have Erin's point, I think is really important. The idea that building on Love Pemberton and the feelings that people have here, and then looking at how that then feeds into emotional well-being, which would look at maybe things like daycare, which also runs into the economy as well. So, but breaking those two things down and going, the economy and economic conditions are over here, and then social well-being is over here, but then both of them are under the umbrella of Love Pemberton. And then, as Rodney was pointing out, like the masks obviously are going to be something that we need to do relatively quickly. We could definitely do it that way, or we could just say the most important thing right now is safety. Let's just work on that, and how it goes into absolutely every element of all of it. So just as a thought, they are going to cross over. Everything is going to come back to being looped back over. And so this whole idea of getting small working groups would be to look to see who else is working on this topic. I agree with Rodney. If we're only going to meet once a month, we're probably not going to get a whole lot done. So we need to think about how we're going to speed that up. And I think that the first thing that we need to do is decide as a group how we want to work together.
So you're suggesting two themes rather than, say, four?
We could do two themes. That would give us a big group. Like right now there's, if I'm looking at the screen, that would be two groups of 6. I think there's Mark and also Judith, who's away. So it would be 2 groups of 7. So we would have enough people from the municipality on either of those teams. And then those teams could come back next week with finding out who else should be involved, who are the stakeholders, where's the low-hanging fruit, what needs to be done quickly. But using this whole idea of Love Pemberton as our North Star as we move forward, and setting aside the idea, because I think Nikki's point is valid, and Rodney too, about the visioning and putting that off to a side and saying that's a whole other project. But for this committee, I think that building under the Love Pemberton is a great idea.
So if we did two committees, or not two committees, two themes at this point, we divided 6 and 6. Again, we'll give ourselves some homework as to what we're bringing back. But do you see some, you know, one or some of either of those two groups splintering further after our next meeting?
No, not.
Does one group end up peeling off to go talk about daycare, and the other is talking about, you know, visitor messaging or whatever? I don't know. You know.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I think that if we split into two groups, those two groups then are going to be able to figure out what are the high priorities, and one might be childcare, and another one might be the food bank. We might say these two things really have to happen for the emotional well-being of the people that live here. So it definitely could be that there's two themes within that one theme that people are going to work on. And then how that team decides to work on it would really be up to that team. So they would come back to this group and say, our recommendations are that we are going to have two groups, one working on this, one working on that. They're going to then come back with the solutions. So we're not going to be implementing anything, I don't think. I mean, unless there's something really obvious that someone's just going to do. But in most cases, I would think that we want to come back together as a group and say, this is what we've discovered, this is what we've uncovered, this is what we figured out, and these are the recommendations, or this is what we think we could do. And that could happen within the next month. I think there's a risk of us just going away, thinking about it, coming back in a month, not having anything done. I mean, I think it's great that we did the thought exchange, but if I answered that thought exchange, I would be like, okay, what are you gonna do? Like, what's next? What's the next step? Where are we going? There is a bit of a sense of emergency. We don't really have the luxury of waiting 6 months to do things. There's people that need solutions to some of these things really quickly. Mm-hmm. So that's just my thought.
What does everybody else think? If we were to do it into two themes, and then within those two groups, we can work, you know, within, what did you have? You had health and, or sort of, how did you have it divided there, Jackie? Environment, economic?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I just want to make the point that everything is connected. Yeah, so I don't want people to think that, you know, but for the sake of work, I think we could just say this is going to be the economic group and this is going to be the emotional well-being group. Obviously, they are both dependent on the other, but just to start looking at the things that we can tackle and start kind of problem solving, it might be a good idea to do it that way. And maybe people on this committee can see themselves gravitating more to one side than the other when we put our hands up and say what we want to work on.
I like that. I think it allows us to keep moving. We're all a little concerned about not you know, this process taking too long. We want to do it thoroughly and carefully, but we also don't want it to take too long. Like you say, the time is now. So I like the idea. I think it would allow for, you know, if the one group is working on, you know, the economy side of things, again, I think transportation will rise to the top, daycare will rise to the top, some of those themes within that group will rise to the top, and we could start, you know, the team could come back and identify some actions and some challenges and that we could talk about it as a whole group. Is everybody good with that approach?
Yes.
Yep.
I think it's great.
Okay, so we're happy with those two themes, and one is based on the economy, one's based on social, mental, and community health.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so next step on that then, is the next step to identify who's going where on those two teams? And then maybe we could talk about some of the goals for both of those teams to work on?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just do it really.
Can I make a comment first? I'm not sure if everyone saw Jay's chat, but she had to leave and she said that she's happy to be assigned to a committee in her absence. So I just wanted to put that out there when we're considering this and want to make a note.
Let's just do a quick show of hands, I guess. Who wants to work on the economy side of things? Stuart?
I can go.
Meredith?
Oh, sorry, Jackie, you're muted.
Sorry, I can go to either side, and I'm happy to work on, like, I'm happy to help both sides if needed, but I can go to either side wherever. If you don't have somebody, I'm happy to go to either one.
Okay. Mark, I can't see you. I'm kind of assuming you want to be on the economy side of things.
Yes, please.
So I've got Stuart, Meredith, and Mark so far. Anybody else?
Like Jackie, I can go either way, and I think like I'd love to be where my skill set's best used, and so I think it depends like what the priorities are going to be for each one.
Okay. And I mean, I don't know. I feel like we should be flexible with this. We can move around a bit too, right? Let's just try to give ourselves a direction. So if you didn't put your hand up for economy, does that mean everybody else is interested in the social? 1, 2, so that would be Natalie. Karen. Who are we missing? We're missing Jay and Judith, right?
I think that probably Judith would want to go in the social and social well-being group.
Okay.
And again, I think it'll be interesting because when we do come back to our groups and we sort of have the list of priorities, I think at that point we should also let people move around if they want to.
I agree. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I'm counting you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, myself. I wasn't counting myself. I'm like, we're missing somebody. Okay, so if we were to put Judith there, right now I've got Rodney and Jackie as an either, and it'd be nice to have you guys split up. And Jay, I'll just put on economy for right now because that gives us even numbers. And I haven't assigned Jill or Nikki or myself. So just as a starting point, and we could start talking about what these groups would do right now. And then to Rodney's point, but I've got Stuart, Meredith, Mark, and potentially Jay on the economy side, Natalie, Ryan, Aaron, Judith, potentially on the social side, Jackie and Rodney getting split up, and village people getting split up accordingly as well. So as a starting point with that, let's talk about what these groups should do, I guess, and identify and what their priorities are, and maybe that'll help define it a little bit better. Is that the obvious next step, you facilitator types?
Yeah, I'm thinking that if Rodney and I split up, Rodney has a slightly different process than I use, and that might be a good way to do it. Because if I'm on a group, I can say to my group, here's a process we can use, we can run through it quickly, and Rodney probably could do the same. I'm thinking, Rodney, because of your background in tourism, it might make more sense for you to go on the economic side. And with my background in mental health, I could go on the emotional well-being side. And then once we get together in those subgroups, like I would be more than happy to drill out a process that we can use right off the bat to figure out going through fact finding and then defining the problem and then coming up with the ideas of the things that we could potentially work on. We could get that done quickly by the next time we meet. What do you think, Rodney, about doing it that way?
Yeah, I think you and I can probably spend 10 or 15 minutes together, and I'd probably lean towards using your process, but we can use the same one for both.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that makes sense. So are you proposing that you and I lead those, or?
Yeah, I mean, from a process point of view, I'm not a content expert as far as Pemberton goes, but from a process point of view, and the other thing that we could do is Rodney and I could go to both committees. So we could work on the social emotional committee, and we could also go work on the economic committee, depending on time. So I'm quite happy to go wherever I'm needed. But I think that quite quickly we can come back to this group. So if we were going to use my process, what we would do is go through fact finding, which would also identify who's already working on it, to go back to Meredith's point, like what's already been done. And then we would spend some time doing root cause analysis. And that's when you figure out what needs to be done first and what's the most effective thing to do immediately. From that, we then would start doing, we would start getting going on coming up with ideating And we wouldn't necessarily formulate solutions yet, but we would have like big buckets of solutions that we could start looking at. And that's when we come back to the group and go, this is what we're working on. And the other group goes, well, this is what we're working on. And there could be some cross-pollination of things, but that's where we identify in what direction we're taking it. But again, I'm going to go back to this overall love Pemberton and this whole idea that everybody should be working on the public safety and health within their categories.
And you, within that work that you just described, I'm assuming there would be identification of short, mid, and long term.
Yeah, we would do that in step 2. So step 1, step 1 is the fact that we've just figured out themes. And then the next step is fact finding, which is to look to see what's being done, where the big gaps are, and who else should be called in. The next step is where we would define the problem in the definition, in the problem definition. That's where you're figuring out the priority. And usually when you work on something like this, you're going to pick, you're going to put it on an impact map. So you're going to look at low effort, high impact. So it's the thing that we're going to do that's going to make the big difference early on and could end up being a bottleneck that we remove that then makes way for a whole bunch of other things to happen. Like as an example, kids not going to daycare, there's no childcare, there's nowhere for children to go. That could be a bottleneck that could then be, or no one has any food. That would be a bottleneck that stops us from doing all kinds of other things. So it's identifying those things first, addressing them, and then moving on.
So Jackie, may I ask, what will you need for that step 2? Would it be helpful if I put all the thoughts into an Excel spreadsheet? Like what will help the groups to sort of start looking at what's short-term, medium-term, long-term priorities and defining the problem, and what will help, do you think?
Well, basically the information that you have is from fact finding. So the information in the thought exchange could still be considered fact finding. We just happen to put it into categories to help us think about what people are talking about. So from that step, I think that the easiest way that we can cluster and give information to the people that are working on the group, the better. So if and I think that Thought Exchange actually does that for us, where we can see what are the most popular themes, how many people are saying they agree with that, so we can see where the energy is. But Henry Ford's quote, if we asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. I think that this group also needs to think about what else is there that we could be providing or could be doing between what people ask for and what we deliver is where value lives. So that's what this team should be thinking about, not just giving people what they ask for, but actually thinking about it in a broader way. So, and that's what the subgroups can do.
Mm-hmm. And so would we start fleshing that out a little bit right now, Jackie, in terms of what the groups, what's expected of each group? Like you just described it very quickly, fact finding, all that sort of thing. Do we break that down further right now, or is that something that we would just sort of discuss what our meeting dates out? You and Rodney provide us with some sort of guidelines for the group, what the expectations are from the subcommittee before this group gets back together.
Yeah, I think that Rodney and I can take a few minutes together just to write it. It sounds like a few minutes. It's probably longer than that. But maybe what we do is we create some facilitator worksheets so that we know what the steps are that we're going through. So right now, so we've got another 30 minutes. I think that what I think would be really helpful, because we now just have our subgroups, is to decide on a plan of when we're going to do the work so that we can come back and report. So we should decide on that and how much time people have to do it. And then I think that we should also, I'm interested in hearing more from Meredith about how we can all utilize this Love Pemberton and where we could take it. Like Rodney threw out an idea really early on that I thought was golden, this idea of getting people to wear masks, and we have Love Pemberton on the mask. Like that could be one thing that we could do from a low-hanging fruit perspective that we could do very quickly that may check off something on our list if we could think about how to do that. So But from a process point of view, I think that what we really want to decide is when we're going to meet and when we're going to get back together again. And then Rodney and I can work out like a worksheet that would show people this is what we would hope that you could get done by the next milestone, which is the next meeting. How does that sound?
I think we're good here. I just want to, I'll get to you in a sec, Joe. I just want to check in with Rodney. You've been unusually quiet, Rodney. I want to see where you're feeling on this.
I'm good. I think this will get there. The key thing is for me still figuring out those short-term priorities as quickly as we can for like what actions we are. And we're just saying that we're going to do those in a group half this size, basically. And the process that Jackie's talking about, I think we can figure out and lead, but we should get on that, I think.
Okay. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm just wondering, for process sake, would it be helpful if we planned a next meeting, all of us would be in attendance, and then we could maybe do breakout rooms, and then after the breakout rooms we could come back together and talk about what each group has determined as a priority. Ellie, do we have the capacity to do that within our Zoom license, to do breakout rooms?
We can do breakout rooms in Zoom meetings, but not using webinar. So we might have to use a different format for the next meeting.
Okay.
So here's a question for everybody. So to me, I feel like the working sheet and the process that Rodney and Jackie are going to provide the subgroups with, I feel like that's on its own going to be a 2-hour conversation for the subgroup. I'm happy from my own group, and I don't expect this from everybody, but if people have the time, I would be happy to meet later this week or early next week with my subgroup for a couple of hours, and then circle back with the bigger group in the following week. Or, I think these next 2 meetings, these next 2 steps are going to be really important to getting our momentum going. And so I'm happy to meet with the subgroup within another week, and then within a week following that, we can circle back. So sort of what you're suggesting, Jill, I just feel like we're not going to have enough time on a 2-hour call to break out and then come back together. I feel like we need 2 hours as a subgroup, and then we need another, meeting as the whole group relatively quickly.
But as what are we going to talk about as a whole group, though? I'm just thinking
we're bringing back the results of everything we're talking about as a subgroup.
Yeah, so we're going to share that, but beyond that, what do you think we'll need to, I'm just wondering, I don't know if it's going to take as long to report back as what you're thinking.
Well, hopefully there's going to be some low-hanging fruit and some quick action that's going to come out of that meeting. There's going to be a little bit of identifying some of the crossover that each group is working on, where we're, so we're not duplicating each other and we're strengthening each other. I think we're going to, like Jackie said, cross-pollinate a little bit and give each other some input, and then really head off with, some strong direction for each subgroup after that. We might have identified, like, I forget who said it now, that maybe one of those groups now has to be split into 2, or I don't know, but I think it'll get our next steps going pretty quickly. This group's meeting might not be 2 hours. That might take an hour. I feel like the subcommittee, original one, identifying, fact-finding, identifying work that's going on out there, identifying challenges and all that sort of thing, that's a 2-hour conversation on its own. And then this group gets together for an hour, again, cross-pollinates, suggests, and then we move on. Does that make sense?
Can I ask a question? So we could obviously schedule the subcommittee groups outside of this because it's a group of about 6. But should we maybe connect offline? Just if Jackie and Rodney are leading this, they're going to need some time to prepare that structure or help assist in that, and just sort of figure next steps based on what their strategy is on bringing that forward to the subgroups. I think it'll be easy.
Take a few minutes.
Yeah, I know. But then with the caveat that it sounds like it's only going to be a few minutes, but it probably will take longer. So I'm just trying to think about what their commitments are, and it's 6 people or maybe 7, which could be a easier group to coordinate. But could we just keep it a little bit open as to not scheduling that just yet to figure out what the process would be? And then we can reach out through our groups, through Jill or whichever, she's done a great job coordinating, and figure that out.
Jackie, Rodney, do you want to talk about timelines in terms of our next steps?
Sure. Before I jump in, okay. So time frames. I'm available this week. We're going back over to Keats Island, but everything happens on the internet anyway, so we can do it remotely. And then I think that the small groups, we need to send out some kind of a doodle or something so that we can figure out when people have time. I agree that, like you can go through all the steps in an hour, but you're not going to do as good of a job if you have more time. I think that we can set time aside. Groups might not need all that time. So I think that as the process goes, a group offside, a small group, planning on working for about 2 hours, coming back to the main group in 2 weeks would be ideal if we can do it.
Does that make sense to you, Ron?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. My availability this week is really good and then gets harder. So I'm happy to connect as soon as you want, Jackie, and put some meat on the bones of that process and share it back to the group. That probably makes sense.
Now, for the rest of you, is that timeline too aggressive? Is that too much to ask from your busy schedule, or would that work for you?
Well, I can definitely make something work for probably next week.
I can make it work too.
Yeah, I'm pretty flexible, and like I said, I'm happy to see what dates you come up with.
Okay. I saw nodding from everybody except Stuart. Stuart, are you good with that?
Next week's looking reasonable at this point.
Okay.
Nikki, is there anything from like a corporate standpoint with working groups, like note taking, minute taking, anything like that?
Well, I wouldn't say officially as in official minutes, but if somebody could be maybe appointed as a note taker, it could just be so that we have a track on what the discussion and what was going on. Again, it doesn't have to be verbatim, but I think it would be beneficial for this group. I don't think there would have to be there's no official recommendations to the committee or anything like that, unless you really wanted to go down that route. But if you're going to be presenting it, it would be the committee who would agree to that and make a recommendation at this level.
Okay. So just to recap, the thought is we split into our groups. We meet within a week in our subgroups. We circle back to the big group in 2 weeks. Sorry, I'll back up. By the time the subcommittee meets, Jackie and Rodney have provided us with a bit of a working sheet and a process and a checklist of things that the subcommittee should bring back to the main group. We set that meeting for a couple hours, go off and do that, come back to this group and within a couple weeks, and then go from there. That's what we're all looking at. And we're all good with that. Okay.
Do we want to go back and do official recommendations at this point? I have some notes.
Okay, let's wait. Let's wait a few more minutes there, Nikki, just to make sure nothing else specific comes out. Is there anything else, Jill, from your perspective, from any of your perspectives, that we need to provide now or come up with now to go through the process I just described?
I don't think so. Not from my perspective. I think having that framework that Rodney and Jackie will put together for us is going to be key. So I think that's the only thing that we really need. And if there is anything that the groups need from me prior to their meeting, I'm happy to provide that.
Okay.
Bill?
Yes.
Could I get a picture of or a copy of the bar graph you had on the meeting today, please?
Yeah, it's in the agenda. Actually, there's a link in the agenda that takes you to that report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if nobody's looking for anything else specific, go ahead, Meredith.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I wanted to answer Jackie's question about the Love Pemberton. From my perspective, it's totally great to amplify that and, use it. That was the intent behind it, was to kind of rally the community behind our mutual love of Pemberton. I mean, our goal is to promote local, buying local. So that's kind of what the whole goal of it from the Chamber's perspective is. And then one thing I really got actually from the thought exchange, there was quite a bit saying like, we need to have something to promote buying local and encouraging people to buy local more. So I think for me, it's like, how can we dig even deeper into that and come up with more things that, can help us promote that and get that across the community? Because sometimes I think too, there's a gap between, you can see it in the thought exchange, like, oh, I know this is being worked on by this group, but obviously the community doesn't know, everybody doesn't know about it, and how do we solve that problem? So I love the idea of using that as something tangible to rally around. So I just want to say that.
The one issue that Judith did raise was just around, and also Jay did, just around making sure we get input from those who may not necessarily have the technological means. I'm just wondering if that's something that I should be addressing perhaps before we have our larger MTF meeting in a couple of weeks, like be it being at the grocery store, and promoting the thought exchange, just so, you know, we make sure we get representation from that group of people. So that might be something that I might work on before our next MTF, if the group is comfortable with that.
Yeah, can I ask a question to the group on that line? When we, you know, of this group, Jill used the term, you know, how to get through to that group. Who are we talking about? Obviously the senior community. Is there other aspects of the community that we're talking about?
Natalie, you want to speak to that?
I can add to that as well. I think it's just there's different individuals that, for example, people that are on social income assistance, people that have disabilities. So I think that there's different pockets of organizations that we can potentially even go and connect with to solicit the feedback, because those groups are working directly with those individuals. So yeah, so I think there's a couple different areas that I'm sure that Jay and Aaron as well, we can all provide some ideas on where some of these individuals are connecting, and same with Judith as well, and just trying to get those surveys out through those channels as well.
Are you, Natalie, Aaron, Jay's not on there, willing to either through email or have a conversation offline with Jill just to identify those groups or those individuals and means to connecting with them?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the best way to do that, Jill?
We'll just do it by email. I think I've just self-assigned myself to the social and mental well-being group, so I'll go
Jill,
on that one.
Can I make a comment? Maybe something as simple as, I don't know if we've done this, just as, can we have like a sign maybe at the library about, because there are people who are coming in to start using the computers.
Yeah.
And maybe say, hey, did you know?
I've got one that's going to be going at the corner of the grocery store. Like, I don't know if everyone has seen the posters I've put up around town for it, but there's going to be a big A-frame at the grocery store with the QR code or the website that people could use, but I could certainly get a second one and put it at the community center. I think that there are going to be some people that will have to give me their feedback verbally or on paper, and then I'll have to input it into Thought Exchange for them.
I think having one at the food bank would also be very valuable, and same with Sea to Sky Community Services. Yeah.
And if we could use that sandwich board at the market on Fridays to put it out there on Friday.
I remember the last meeting too, Judith had said that she was able to, you know, help input things and help with that.
I just don't want to wait a couple of weeks for that.
Is she gone for a while?
I think she's gone for a week, but I would like to sort of at least just start a plan and maybe sort of some dates on when we would maybe set up at the farmer's market or set up outside of the grocery store, or maybe visit if there's any sort of meetings that we should be at to encourage them to give feedback. Anyway, I will connect with that group after this and we can talk about it.
Okay, perfect. So two last things. We're going to go through the formalities of putting a motion together to split up the groups. But before we get there, how does each group want to, Jill or Ellie, are you going to coordinate a doodle poll for each group, or how's it going to work for setting up our meeting?
Sure, I can do that. I can do doodle polls for both groups. Yeah.
Okay.
And then also do one for the MTF in 2 weeks as well.
And we're hoping to have a meeting of the subgroup within 7-8 days, and then another 7-8 days following that would be the main group.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Can I get a motion from somebody to develop?
Hang on, can I have a couple different ways we need to do this, because I have one that we as a committee can do ourselves, and then one that we need to do as a recommendation from to council.
Okay, go ahead.
So the first one would be that the Mayor's Task Force recommends to Council that the following 2 themes be established as priorities for the committee: economy and emotional well-being.
Yeah, I would call it economic well-being and social well-being.
Okay. Okay.
Everybody good with that? Somebody make that motion? Jackie, seconded by Stuart. All in favor, opposed, motion carries.
And then the second one I would suggest would be that the committee appoint the following members to the established working groups. And so then we would have sort of economic well-being and the emotional well-being, and we can put all of the individuals underneath. And that once the members, and that the members may be reassigned following the establishment of the short-term priorities.
Okay. Are you gonna move her? Ryan, seconded by Meredith. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Oh, but we didn't put the names on that.
Yeah, sorry, we will put them in the, so I have Stuart, Meredith, Mark, Jay, Rodney, which again, Rodney and Jackie, they can put back and forth, or you guys can go back and forth based on what your strategies will be. And then emotional well-being, Natalie, Aaron, Ryan, Judith, Jackie.
Okay. Now that leaves the three of us.
Yeah.
And Ellie's got to be on all the meetings. That's so how do you guys want to do it? I'm happy to try to sit in on both, or I can pick one.
I don't think we necessarily, I'm open. I don't know if we want to necessarily assign ourselves, or that we can just be part of the, I mean.
I think one of the two of you should be on each.
Yep.
I think having both of your Village IQ on either group would be really helpful.
Yep.
So.
I know Joe indicated emotional well-being was something she was interested in doing, and I'm fine to sound economy.
Okay. I'm happy to do both. Should I float?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
Okay. I got lots of time. Okay. So did I call the question on that?
I have Ryan and Meredith.
Okay. All in favor, opposed, motion carries. Do we need any other motions for councils? Are we going to be able to bring that to tomorrow's meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll just do a verbal report on this during that meeting?
Yeah. We have, I think Jill's going to do a little PowerPoint maybe.
Yeah.
Just a very short one. So we'll do that under CAO verbal.
Perfect. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns, questions? Everybody's good with it. I think that was a little bit tangled, but I think we got to where we needed to be there. It was, as usual, a bit of a process, but I think we're still moving forward at a good rate. I think there's a good sense of urgency in the group too. We all want to keep things moving here. As we keep saying, we got to get this done now. So I feel like this timeline we've set for ourselves will be really productive. I think if we can accomplish in the next 2 weeks what we're setting out, then we'll get some good momentum going following that. So nobody's got anything else? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. We'll be in touch in a few days.
Thank you. Are you going to do a motion to adjourn?
Oh, motion to adjourn. Moved by Jackie, seconded by Natalie. All in favor, opposed, we're adjourned. Thanks, you guys.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.